Hello, my name is Eric Putkonen. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about illusion is not also Brahman. This is something I occasionally hear. I heard it again recently. And it's a misconception, a failed logic, really. It's an over-application of the idea of non-duality. Fundamentally, it is trying to count that which does not exist among that which exists and saying the two have to be one, otherwise it's duality, which would be incorrect. I mean, if you had imaginary friends and somebody asks, how many friends do you have? It would be incorrect to count your imaginary friends among your actual friends, because you're counting people that do not exist. They're just ideas in your head with people that actually exist. But under this idea that, well, illusion too must be also Brahman, you're basically saying if you don't count the imaginary friends among your actual friends, then that's duality. And that's incorrect. Because we can imagine so many things. I mean, let's play with this a little bit. If we take, just imagine some kind of creature that never existed. You know, you could start off with mythology or whatever you want, but just create something that does not exist. Totally imagined. You don't have to give it a name. Now, does the thoughts exist? Yes, the thoughts are arising. So the thoughts, being they are, thought is what is, so it's also Brahman. That's true. The concept of this creature exists. So yes, the concept of this creature is, because you just imagined it, so it's part of Brahman. It's also Brahman. Does the creature exist? No. And because the creature does not exist, it's purely imagined, it's not something that actually exists, the creature is not also Brahman. You cannot count that which does not exist as something which is. Because what is Brahman? Brahman is fundamentally that which is. All that exists is Brahman. There's nothing other, nothing separate. Brahman does not include everything that does not exist, because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And so you can't say it's a duality. It would be very strange to say, well, Brahman's got to include everything that does not exist as well. No, it doesn't. Brahman is simply what is. That which isn't is a fiction. It's made up. And so as we conceptualize this imaginary creature that does not exist, again, the thought exists, the concept exists. If you suddenly came to believe that it exists, and maybe you saw a photo that vaguely resembled what you imagined, you went, oh, it really does exist, and you start believing that this creature does exist. That doesn't make the creature exist. It's just further misconception, misunderstanding, which creates the illusion of this creature existing. So the thoughts, the concepts, the incorrect beliefs, yes, those are. So all that is Brahman. But the creature itself does not exist. And the creature itself is the illusion. That does not exist. That is not also Brahman. It's a fine point of differentiation. This is why so many of the old texts talk about it's important to be able to differentiate between that which is and that which is not, or as they put it, the real and unreal. Because it's very easy to accidentally start seeing that which is not real, and start counting it as if it's real. You can't count that which does not exist as part of that which exists. And so don't create that as a duality. Non-duality does not mean that everything we can think of also has to be Brahman, whether it exists or not. Basically, if all the, let's say, falsehoods, you just start making up tons and tons of falsehoods, does the thought and what is said arise? Well, yes. But that doesn't make the falsehood something that exists, in terms of, you can't say everything that's said, no matter how false, must be also part of truth. You're trying to equate truth and false as if they gotta be one thing, otherwise it's not non-duality. You're destroying the distinction between that which is and that which is not. You're destroying the distinction between real and unreal, which so many of the Advaita texts talk about. That distinction exists because you cannot count the two as if they're the same. You cannot, in the same breath, say that that which is imagined is also part of that which exists. Does the thought arise? Yeah, the thought is part of what is, so the thought exists. The thought is Brahman. But if what is imagined, the concept, the imaginary creature, for example, earlier that we talked about, that creature does not exist. And so you can't count that as part of existence of what is. Only the thought of it can be counted. And when somebody says the illusion, they're usually not strictly speaking about the thought of it. It's the thought of a me that, arises. The thought of a me, like all thoughts, exists. Thought exists. Should be a no-brainer. Thought is also Brahman. Sure. But does every thought, not just the thought existing is, I'm trying to get a very, very clear thing without getting it too confused. Thoughts they arise. So that's of Brahman. But what the thoughts represent do not actually exist. And so, just like the imagined creature does not actually exist, yes, the thought arose, that's of Brahman, but the creature that was imagined is not of Brahman. It doesn't exist. Likewise, the idea of me, yes, the thought of a me arises, that is of Brahman. Does the me exist? No. The me does not exist. And so, you cannot say, well, the me also is Brahman, because now you're trying to equate that which is not, that which is false, with what is real, and you're destroying the distinction between the two. It's important to keep the distinction between that which is and that which is not. And so, don't try to equate or combine the thought with what it represents also being real. Just like having the thought of an imaginary creature is not the same as the creature itself existing. It's two different things. And so while I can agree that thoughts arise, misconceptions arise, misunderstandings can arise, and that creates the illusion per se of a me or a creature that doesn't exist, that it exists. The illusion itself doesn't exist. Only the thought of it exists. And so it's a fine point, because to say the illusion is also Brahman, like I said, fundamentally that phrase, the illusion is also Brahman, as some people try to pitch it to me sometimes, that is fundamentally saying that which is not is also that which is. And that is incorrect. You have to dial it back a little bit and really look at that which is. And that is thought. Thought is also Brahman. Thoughts exist. Thoughts arise. But if the thought causes a misconception, a misunderstanding, and creates an illusion, the illusion doesn't exist. That is not also a Brahman. It's a fine point, but I'm trying to hammer it in here in different ways, and I'm hoping I covered it in enough different ways it makes sense. I've had to redo this video a couple of times just because as I'm explaining it, it's almost like the language isn't able to convey the subtlety of this point very well. And, you know, because it's seductive to try to equate the two. And many people do that. It's like, well, you know, non-duality. It's got to include everything. Well, it doesn't include all the stuff that we make up that doesn't exist. The thoughts do. The thoughts exist. But again, it's the distinction is the difference between the thought of a creature that does not exist is not the same as saying the creature exists. And so the thought of a creature is not the same thing as the illusion of the creature existing. Those are not equatable. Those are two different subtle things. But I don't know, I hope I made sense on this one. It's subtle enough where I'm having a hard time trying to convey it, I think. But it's a sticking point. But I would say the trick is to not dissolve distinction, because there is still always the distinction between the real and the unreal, that which is versus that which is not. And you cannot combine and blur the two together to say the two must be one and the same, otherwise it's not non-duality. That you'll lose your way if you do it that if you try to combine the two that way. Anyways, if you got any questions, comments, please post below. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more than usual. But anyways, thank you much.